If you usually play good, but always tend to screw up during a clutch, then you might be making one of the 5 clutching mistakes I'm gonna go over. Many people seem to play during clutches the same way they would if all their teammates were alive, but that's a huge mistake. To find out how you should actually play during a clutch, stick around to the end of this video. Mistake number 1 is never isolating 1v1s. Why is being in a 1v2 so much harder than in a 1v1? It's not always the fact that you have to kill 2 different people, it's usually you having to kill another one right after you got the first one as the hard part. And this is why you want to try to isolate duels when clutching. If you blindly run into a site without clearing any positions, then you're gonna be exposed to so many angles that the likelihood of both enemies seeing you is very high. If you on the other hand only try to be exposed to one or as few angles as you can and properly clear them before moving on to the next one, then you're way more likely to actually get the kill on someone as you spot them, but also likelier to not get traded immediately, which is your goal in a clutch. When you learn how to pick off enemies one by one, you're gonna notice that clutching in 1v3s, 1v4s is gonna become way easier for you. This is a perfect segue into my second mistake, which is being afraid of aggression. Many times people seem to think that when you're in a clutch, you want to be passive and try not to die. And while the second part of that is true, you definitely don't want to be too passive. To be able to isolate 1v1s, you a lot of times have to be aggressive and do some things unexpected. For example, pushing an area after planting the spike. This is one of the easiest ways to catch a rotator off guard, as people won't really be expecting you to be the aggressor. Combining this with planning for a specific area is ideal. For example, planning close to CT on A site Haven. This will allow you to pretty much instantly walk into CT after you plan it, which almost guarantees you a kill if you do it well. After getting this kill, you'll also get a lot of space and can either walk up into Heaven or stay in CT depending on the location of your enemies. Compare this to planning default and going back short. Of course, that's a viable strategy as well, but it's such an expected play that you're very likely to get smoked, flashed, mauled, etc. And after that, you've pretty much lost. I say that going down the more common route or playing passively is better in a 1v1, as the chance of you getting an ability thrown at you out of the blue is quite low since the enemy probably wants to remain unknown. But if you're in a 1v2 or anything above that, then try being aggressive sometimes. Let's move on to a common mistake for defenders in clutches. This mistake is not staying on the site you were holding. Let's say you're left A alone, but haven't seen any enemies there for a while. Then it's very easy for you to run away to the other side thinking that the enemies are there. But you should probably stay A instead. This is especially common in a 1v1, where the attacker fakes rotating to the other side for you to then run after them and they end up planting on the site you just left. Instead of fully leaving the site, you could try to take a bit more of a passive angle, where you still have a view over the site, but you can rotate quickly if the spike gets planted on the other side. The reason I don't advocate for switching sites fully is that you have no info on where the enemy or enemies are, meaning that they could still be A, but just taking it slow and waiting for a push or some info from you. They could be in your spawn, but they could also be on the other side. Because you have such limited knowledge, by sticking to a good position on the site you're currently holding, you still have a 50% chance of being right, and if you are, then your chance of winning or at least getting some kills is way higher than if you're cluelessly running around looking for the enemies or having to retake the other site. Mistake number 4 is arguably the biggest mistake you can make in clutches, and that's not playing together with your teammate if one's alive. We've so far only discussed clutching when you're alone, but knowing how to play with others in a clutch is crucial as well. If you're retaking with a teammate, then this is incredibly important, as like I mentioned before, checking angles together will have the enemy forced to kill both of you right away without getting traded. And done correctly, you should pretty much always get a trade. The same thing goes for post-plan scenarios in attacker. You want to try to always be able to trade the other player. This means sticking close and clearing angles together. You can also experiment with crossfires or other tactics. And if your teammate isn't cooperative, then just do your best to follow them and trade them when they die. The next mistake is not actively thinking about where the enemy could be hiding. When I'm in a post-plant scenario, I always think of where I would be if I were the enemy. I mainly use this while retaking bomb sites, but it works well for holding them post-plant as well. Why this works so well is because there are many different positions where the enemy could be, that if you try to clear them all, you're just gonna run out of time. This means that you gotta prioritize the ones where the enemy is most likely hiding, but this can be tricky to think of in a moment's notice. And therefore, using a method such as thinking where you yourself would be can work wonders. In general, the enemy is going to be hiding in a default position, because the most common positions are usually the ones where you either have cover or the ability to watch over multiple areas. An example of this would be hookah on bind. There are plenty of boxes in there that you could use as high ground or cover, as well as a good view over the entire site and only one way to get flanked. So yeah, while the enemy could be hiding on site, that isn't very likely if the spike is planted anywhere visible from hookah. And that's something I also want to mention. 9 out of 10 times, the position you're gonna find the enemy in is the one where the spike is planted for. So if it's planted default, then they're probably not gonna be CT, so I wouldn't really waste my time even looking there. Of course, them going around is always a possibility, but time is an incredibly important resource when clutching, so even if you're taking a bit of a risk not clearing some positions, it might actually be worth it sometimes. If you want to get better and rank up in VALORANT, then check out the plays on screen right now. That's all I got for today, see you next time.